Good to go.
Well, good morning, everybody. We are back to another Monday morning with Master Wall with Grant and Brian. I am Brian.
I am Grant.
We are here to bring you education, entertainment, and engagement within our industry of construction. Please, as always, email Grant or myself with questions, comments, concerns, or whatever you want. Say hi or buy some material. That would always be too. We'll answer those questions. Today, I am so excited for this show. I have two mentors in my life, Mitch Miller and Dave Stutzman, when it comes to construction, specification, and all of that fun stuff. Mitch, in general, over 40 years of designing, project managing, director of specifications for firms. Specifically right now, he's running his own firm, M2 Architectural Resources. Three things that he really kind of focuses on is maintaining specifications. He does do envelope and exterior envelope commissioning and things like that. But the thing that I really loved with this description of things was Division 1 and Division 00. And that we're going to get into a little bit today because I think it's so important to understand what that is. Dave, founder of Conspectus, independent specifications consultant since 1978. So almost 30 years of doing this. Right now, he's rethinking kind of the way and the process that specifications are done. This way, basically through what you have now, Dave, I saw is the Conspectus cloud software, providing collaborative and transparent documentation methods, the process that enables continuous cost analysis and design validation with the owner's requirements, eliminating the gaps. And I think that's one of the huge pieces of talking with you guys today. As always, CSI is what brought me to you guys. I appreciate you guys so much. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. We're going to see each other. I'm going to toss it to you guys with a quick softball question of just saying, what would you say to the question of the difference between a specifier and an architect? Welcome to the two of you.
The difference, well, my thinking, the primary difference is that the architects are principally concerned about design. I am an architect and trained as an architect. Could I design anything? No, please don't let me design. You don't want anything that I'm going to design. But I love putting buildings together. So very much on the technical side, trying to understand products and systems and how everything goes together, and essentially being the sounding board for some of the architects so that if they have a design idea, that we can help translate that design idea into something a contractor can actually buy and build.
Yeah.
Well, Dave and I think, are both unique in the fact that we're both registered architects and we're both specifiers, and you don't find that very often. So the difference is, like Dave said, the architects are worried about the graphic portion and we're worried about the descriptive portion. So it's hard to change hats. You know, I've been doing this for a long time as a project manager, as design architect, and so.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those things, even talking to the two of you for so long now and seeing that difference when I go talk to an architect and I can realize, okay, they don't write specs, or I can talk to an architect and I know that they're writing their spec because of the language that they use. It's similar to what you have used with me in the past. I think one of the things that I had put down here, and we kind of got into it a little bit when you guys were talking about, you know, years ago, having as architects to draw things. You would only want to draw it once because it was you drawing something. Whereas now, you know, it's kind of like we cruise through this process because, CAD and BIM and all these other things make things so easy. Yeah, they may make them easy, but we don't really think through the process. Why would you say it, and this is kind of the question, why is specification so important? However, with the caveat to that is, what's the value or what things have changed over the last like 10 years in specification? I mean, you guys have been doing this for so long. I think clearly you've seen the changes. Drawings may be one of them, but why is it so important? Why is the specification so important? And what in that process maybe has changed positively or negatively within the specification world?
Well, can you bake a cake just from the picture?
Yeah.
No, you can't. You need the recipe. And that's what the specifications do. And the specifications and the drawings work together. They both have equal value. So you can't separate them, because the drawings really represent the quantity issue, the where things are, and the specifications actually describe the products and how the recipe goes together.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like your analogy, Mitch, because it really is the recipe. You know, that you can't get there with just the drawings. Even if you try to add notes on the drawings, you would end up with sheets and sheets of just notes, which are really at that point just a substitution for the specification. And we still get to the same end result, but the spec still is important. Brian, you asked about what's changed. There's been huge changes, huge. And I think the advent of BIM, you know, the BIM promise, push the button and we're done, right? So we're not there yet.
Yeah.
So we're still trying to struggle, and actually I'm starting a new project where we're working directly with an owner, and they're wanting us to build a spec so that it actually connects with a BIM, and so that the architects and engineers can actually coordinate what they're drawing with the spec. This one is really strange for us because who's there first?
Yeah.
In this case, we are. So we're actually getting a chance to drive the design with words before the designers are even involved.
And that's that part of that PPD that you were talking about, right?
Yep.
When it comes to project planning and design and going through really on the beginning stage, it's even more than that, right? Because did you guys do schematic design for that at all then beforehand?
Well, this one, again, a little bit of a hybrid because it's a prototype. So they've built several of these facilities already, but now they're trying to create the prototype and be able to take that forward. So we have some indication of what they have built.
Right.
But that's not necessarily what they want. Right.
Brian, you ask what's changed. I think what's changed is the attitude of owners and architects thinking that you can just push a button, like you said, and things change that quickly. And because the BIM is there, because people are using that, they're thinking that that's all that they need. But when you get down to it and you have, let's just say you show a window that might be an object that's from a specific manufacturer, but yet the specifications may call for a different manufacturer or a different performance than what that window will do, then you actually have a conflict in the documents between the specifications and the drawings when you start to try to incorporate the full BIM, the promise of BIM, as Dave said.
Interesting. So in either way of those, how valuable is the product rep, and how can that product rep add value? I mean, he may not be valuable, but he can add value in some way of giving some information, or maybe he is extremely valuable by adding the value in this way specifically. Is there anything you see from the product rep standpoint that you were like, yeah, this is valuable?
Are you asking whether you're valuable, Brian?
Be careful, Mitch.
I'm teasing, really, Brian. You know that.
I know you do. I know you do.
The product reps bring us valuable information about their specific products. And I always ask them, where should I not use your product to keep us and our owners out of trouble? So that's where I think the value comes from the product rep. They become what we call a trusted advisor, somebody that we can call on and say, where can we use your product? We're thinking about this. But also, I think that that product reps have to be in front of people like Dave and I to tell us about their products before they're required, because a lot of times things happen that it's too late.
Yeah.
And what we're trying to push to, Brian, is actually getting the specifier, product reps, suppliers, distributors all involved in the project far earlier, because we're seeing CMs providing pre-con services. We're seeing design builders essentially getting involved directly with the owners, but they're making decisions that are affecting cost and quality but they're really not looking at the cost impact of some of these decisions when they get started, or the quality impact. So what we're trying to promote, even through American Society of Professional Estimators, is there's a need for this continuous estimating. But to be able to do that, you need decisions, documented decisions. So at that point, hey, bring in the product representatives early. Let's look and talk about what we're trying to accomplish. This is the design intent. How can we get it done?
Yeah. And that's part of those pieces where it almost would, I don't know, maybe it would eliminate substitutions, right? Because you're working on it continuously, where if a product then doesn't work for whatever the situation may be, you can replace it really quick and easy because you see it, you know it, and it's not a big, long, drawn-out process of a substitution request form, and you're getting 15 of these all at once. You're constantly working on that process.
Yeah, we're trying to get it to a point where I want to be able to describe an entire system in a sentence, something an estimator can price. So if you want to look at, 4 or 5 different exterior wall assemblies, fine. 4 sentences, there you go. Let's price them. Let's do the cost analysis and comparative cost and performance, make a decision. This is all before a designer creates any drawing.
Yeah. Brad's got this question here where he talks about specifications being messed up. And Dave, I'll highlight to say, the one that I sent the 2 of you guys, and we talked about the Division 7 specifically. And you had pointed out very specific to Division 7 having, 6 characters there, whereas the one that I sent you, even though the date was 2020 on the spec, the actual thing had 5. But his question is, shouldn't the specs be getting better by now versus worse in some aspect? But we did talk about that. What are your thoughts?
Well, garbage in, garbage out. I mean, if you don't have the right information, your output's going to be the wrong information also. So if it's an outdated specification with old ASTM numbers, or like you said, has 5 digits instead of 6, it starts to tell the tale a little bit early when you see those.
And let's face it, you as suppliers and contractors, you know when you see a spec, if it's out of date, right?
Yeah.
And as soon as you see something that's out of date, what's its reliability? And will you even pay attention? And that really becomes a lot of the issue that, hey, if as a contractor I look at this, I know it's out of date, why should I bother? I'm just going to do things the way I think it should be done. And now that could lead to a conflict later, but you're probably offering a better solution.
And also, if you find out on the spec that there's a manufacturer that no longer exists, that's a telltale thing too. And like Dave said, once that comes up, contractor looks at it and says, well, how much can I rely on everything else that you've done because of one error?
Right.
And it's not just the one spec section. So we could be talking about an exterior wall assembly, right, that you discover is really outdated, but then that reflects on the entire project as well. So how reliable is anything?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Where else did they mess things up?
Hey, Brian, Dennis had a question here. And Dennis, I may need you to clarify the first one. But the second question he had was, how specific do you get with the systems and the finishes? There's so many new finishes that come out. I'm guessing this is more pertaining to EIFS, but also other finishes. But how specific do you get with the finishes you're selecting?
I think a lot of that. Oh, sorry, Mitch, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I think that a lot of that's driven by the aesthetics, and some of that is, driven by the design professional, the designer, as far as what the finishes are. I know when I've done interior stuff, I rely on the interior designer to come up with the products, and then you find out that what they really want doesn't meet the need, based upon whether it's a lead project or whatever they're trying to accomplish. Maybe this product A doesn't go with product B, and they don't know that.
Yeah, there are a lot of things that you want to take into consideration, but in your writing the spec, a lot of it is how important is whatever you're trying to describe to the design team. if it is important, they're likely to tell us, and they'll likely want a lot more detail about whatever it is that is important. So we go through this routinely, say for ornamental metals, because it's almost always custom fabrication. So how do you describe what that end result is, and if it's really critical to the design, you need to get into a great lot of detail to be able to describe what it is the designer expects. If we're picking from a manufacturer's standard range, at least we have identifiable options. So in the case of EIFS for an exterior finish, we can look to see what are the options. Those are much easier selection. And if we can make it, because we know it affects cost, we know it affects quality or appearance, we need to make those. And so that you're not guessing.
One question I always ask is, of the owner, is there some make or break items that they want to see aesthetically in order to make sure that we meet that design intent, so we can make sure we specify those appropriately.
And the other question Dennis had was, what are your thoughts on good, better, best systems? And Dennis, I know for us in our stucco assemblies and our Simplaster systems, we offer a lot of options there. So do you want to clarify that question a little bit, Dennis, kind of what you're getting at there?
Yeah, I can do that. Just wanted to know how far, when you wrote a spec, how canned it was, or do you look at good, better, and best systems where we try to guide the architect, or are you pretty much more custom than that?
Mitch, and I know Mitch, you might not have been able to hear him, so I'll kind of repeat it. And I think I get what you're saying, Dennis, on the good, better, best, as far as systems that are out there. Are you as a specifier architect more concerned with that good, better, best scenario, or are you really just saying, hey, give us the general kind of what we need for a spec, and we'll work this through that process of, okay, do they want to spend, let's just say $10 a square foot versus $15 a square foot? Does that really make a difference on the specification part of where you guys are at?
Well, of course it makes a difference. I mean, it all depends on the performance that you're trying to get out of that product. So the good, better, best, I mean, that's always, who describes good, better, best? Is that the manufacturer that describes it? Is it the owner that describes it? Is the designer that describes it? So you have to make sure that you're going to meet the performance that's required wherever that product is, whether it's inside, outside, or within the structure itself.
Mm.
So one of the concerns that we have is with good, better, best, it's the attitude generally is that the designers are going to select and that the owners want the highest quality possible. But not every project warrants the highest quality possible. So what we want to be able to do is describe the quality that's appropriate for the project, for that particular product, that system, that use. So knowing as a specifier that you have options to choose from, the good, better, best, at least it's a discussion point that you can have with the design team to say, look, you're already over budget. You're now selecting the highest quality product. You know it's going to add more cost. You really can't afford it because you've already been through VE once. So we need to have that performance cost discussion, that analysis, to know what the project can actually afford and what performance the owner is actually trying to gain.
Yeah.
If you're working with a developer, a lot of times they're just interested in getting the building up and flipping it over. So they may not be looking for the best quality. They're looking for the cheapest price to get the building out there so that they can flip it. And now if you're talking with a developer that's going to keep the building, that's a different story. Now, I've dealt with a lot of owners that the owners own the building, so they're going to make a little bit different decision than a developer.
Yeah, big time. Absolutely. Grant, you had one.
Yeah, for us as reps, when we go into firms, a lot of times they tell us, hey, we don't even have spec writers. We don't have anybody that's even managing our specs here internally. And also, I've been into a firm, where they just say, hey, we design a lot of national account type projects that are prototypes, and we're just going to use whatever that developer owner tells us is in the spec. Related to that, do you see value in programs like MasterSpec, SpecLink, And how do you evaluate those versus what you do as a professional where you're specifically writing specifications for projects?
Well, the first question, Grant, I would say give them my name and David's name if they don't have a spec writer.
That's right.
I like that. Thanks, Mitch. Yeah, and Grant, I would say, the spec systems that are out there, you mentioned the two, spec, master spec and BSD spec link, and there's a third depending upon what you're trying to do, spec text. They're commercial masters. They're meant as a start point for the projects, and they each one of them have their own pluses and minuses. And it's a matter of really adopting something and looking at what you think is going to fit the project types, the kinds of clients, how deeply involved the specifications have to be. We've used all of them. We wrote spec text for a time, and what we've done is we've opted now not to use any of them, and we're writing our own.
Mm.
So, I mean, we're probably one of the few that's actually doing that. I think most folks are going to opt primarily for master spec and maybe secondarily for BSD spec link.
Yeah.
Yeah, Brian, more of a statement than a question, but we see it all the time when specs are written. They'll call for an XPS system in an EIFS assembly, and then it goes out to bid, and guys are bidding a number with an XPS type installation, and they get the numbers and go, well, we didn't want that. That's not what we wanted.
Yeah.
But it's listed in their spec, and it's because they're using a master spec type platform and
Yeah.
just clicking buttons, and they don't know what they actually put into their specification.
Yeah.
That's why you need somebody like Dave and I to
That's
write
right.
the specs
That's
so that
right.
you get the right answers.
That was a further
Yeah.
plug for you guys, for the professionals out there.
And
Yeah,
I think,
So the one thing there, Grant, you mentioned it. So the commercial spec systems, they're written to try to help folks be able to write virtually any project. But I always said that they want to be able to write 80% of the spec sections for 80% of the projects, and then that other remaining whatever percentage it would be is going to be custom to that project most likely.
yeah.
But they're building in all the options. You have to know what those options are and delete those that really don't apply.
Mhm.
And those are not always obvious.
So I'm going to give you an example. When I was with a major firm, they talked about maybe having all the architects write their own specifications. So I said, fine, I'm going to sit down with one of the partners and one of the project managers, and we started going through one section, the aluminum window section. And by the time we got to the bottom of the first page, the architect said, I don't know what to make the selection. How do I make the selection? Well, that answered the question right there, because the raw data was 60 pages long. And all of a sudden, at the end of the first page, she didn't know what to do.
Interesting. I'll address a couple of things here just on the chat window thing. Scott, I see that, especially when bad spec guides from manufacturers, and I totally agree. I think that if there's a bad spec guide from a manufacturer, that manufacturer should be called immediately and said, look, your spec is out of date. What you're doing is wrong. Or this needs to change, or why do you have this? And ask that manufacturer, because you're right. It is bad when an architect who, like Mitch was just saying, is going to write their own spec, and they're relying on us as a manufacturer for most of it. We need to be in that game of specification just as much, helping that architect. I know that moving forward, Brad, you're asking about whether they're, and we talked about this before, guys, the in-house or out-house kind of specification world, right? And whether or not it's moving in one direction or another, whether he didn't say that, by the way, I did, but what are some of the limitations of outsourcing the specification world? Now, for me, what I'll say briefly is, because, and I know she may not be on here right now, but Melody did sign up, who's working with Master Spec specifically. I know both of you know her, and working with Division 7 specifically. And her job at Master Spec is to clean up Division 7 and all that she's working on, because they want to make sure that they have these things cleaned up, because they know that they need to do it. Does having an outsourced specifier help? Obviously, I know that it does because of what you're saying, but do you think the trend is going to the outsourcing more than it is bringing back specifiers in-house?
You mentioned two different things there, Brian. Okay. Melody works for Master Spec.
Yeah.
So she's working for them to clean up that Division 7 stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And when you get to the manufacturer specs, when you get a guide spec, I always say we have to look at that with more scrutiny, because as a manufacturer, you want your product specified. So there may be some little idiosyncrasies in there that nobody else can meet. And in the public bid world, that becomes a problem. So I'm just going to say that.
Yeah. I think that's a great point, Mitch. I really do, because I think that as over the years, and this is very, very clear from the two of you in educating me, I have done what I can, and Dennis will attest to this. Like, hey, give me a spec that me and my other 3 competitors can match, so that I have that trustedness from the architect or specifier to know, oh, Brian does a good job because Dennis is writing the specs, that these 3 options are there so that public work is okay. And I think that's a huge piece of this. Now, obviously, when you get into like what Dave, what you were saying, like very specific products for a specific job, for a specific need, okay, that's going to change those kind of things. But that's okay. That's way down the line as the project is moving forward or something. So that's a huge piece for sure.
Yeah. And Brian, you were asking about the trend, whether it's in-house or out-house. So here we are, Conspectus as the out-house specifiers, right? Not that has any particular connotation to us.
That's right.
But, the number of independent specifiers is really pretty few. I mean, specification consultants in independent practice has slightly over 200 members, which goes across the United States and some in Canada. And some of those members are actually, like Mitch was, specifiers working inside of architectural firms. So there really are not, even if you multiply by 10 as a rough order of magnitude, so 2,000 independent specifiers to handle some 90,000 architectural firms in the country. It's not going to happen. So many of the firms are still relying on project architects or project managers to write the specifications. They may or may not have somebody in-house that's responsible for maintaining.
Right.
And I think that becomes the biggest issue.
And I think that's a huge piece of value for any product rep, distributor rep that's out there going to see architects, to realize that the specifier, let's say the word specifier, is not always the one that you need to talk with, because those project architects, project managers are the ones doing their own specifications. They may be reaching out to people like you for advice and things like that, but they're the ones that are actually doing it. And so sometimes knowing who or how that architect firm writes their specs is a huge piece. John was asking, given the increase in design, build, delivery systems, how does that impact the quality of the building specification? I know some of your thoughts on this stuff, so I'm good with that question.
I would love to address that one, because I think what happens is we see design build projects all the time. And what tends to happen is the architects, our clients, tend to treat them just like a design bid build project, which is unfortunate because their responsibilities are totally different. And what we're actually trying to promote is, I'll go back to where you opened the program, Brian, with the system and performance description, our term, a uniformat-based description, which is all that design builders need. All they need to do is go buy a subcontract, right?
Interesting.
So as long as we can describe what the building systems are sufficient for them to buy a subcontract, we're good.
Yeah. Interesting.
Hey, Brian, I had one more question. I know we're getting close on time here.
You're
but,
good.
You know, from you guys' perspective, if you could give product reps, a piece of advice for, the best way to add value so that we're either a listed manufacturer in a specification or even hopefully a basis of design, what's the best one or two pieces of advice you could give sales reps to get there?
Talk to us. Seriously. Get to know us, you know? Even with the virus today, are we still seeing folks? Yeah. Once in a while, the doors are still open. The office is still open. We have more people working remotely. But, you know, have your reps wherever they are in the country, because we're in multiple states, you know, reach out, get to know us.
I say everything's about relationships. So if I have a good relationship with Brian, I know I can call him and get the appropriate information to help me with a specific project and the specification for that project. And even if there's a problem, I know I can call Brian and say, listen, I had this project that we had a failure on. What should we be looking for? So it's about relationships. If you have a good relationship with the specifier, the architect, that's important.
And I love that. I mean, obviously the relationship part for us, I mean, and that's what I feel like we've gained over the last years of me getting involved with CSI specifically. But, you know, I think it's interesting always to see that it works from the product rep to the architect. It works from the product rep to the contractor to owner, like the relationship piece of what we do in the construction industry as a whole. It's so much about relationships. I mean, yes, products matter for sure. We're selling products that matter. And high quality products, but the relationships make a difference in that process of building that job, that project to be really good and what everybody intends. Well, guys, I appreciate your time for sure. Stick around. I mean, I know there's a couple more kind of things that are coming. Stuart, if you want to stop this one, we appreciate everybody. We'll be back next week with Dennis Deppner on Monday mornings with Masterwall, our very own Dennis Deppner, the legend for sure within our circles, to talk about what we're doing in-house with our specifications and details and things like that. But we will definitely stick around here for a couple more minutes afterwards to talk a little bit more about some of the other questions that are coming through.
The chat right now.
Yeah, there are.
I mean,
so
not even
Stuart,
questions.
if you want to stop the recording and then start the recording.